The engagement party was supposed to be a joyous occasion. My son's future, finally secured. But one wrong turn, one open door, revealed a truth too devastating to comprehend. My husband with her, his touch, her silence. A secret, carefully buried for decades, now unearthed. Who is Serafina really? And what dark history connects her to the man I married? The answer will shatter more than just a marriage. It will redefine a family. A perfect life can shatter in an instant, exposing the fault lines of trust and secrets. Some betrayals run so deep, they redefine everything you thought you knew. The Vance home buzzed with a nervous excitement, a stark contrast to Eleanor's quiet anticipation. She ran a hand over her navy silk N, finally celebrating his future with Serafina. Deciding to retrieve a sentimental cufflink for Marcus, she headed towards his study, a place usually reserved for quiet contemplation. As she approached the closed door, hushed voices drifted out, not the usual calm tones, but something strained, urgent. She paused, a flicker of unease stirring within her. Hesitantly, she pushed the door ajar, the soft light from the room spilling into the hallway. The sight that met her. Marcus stood too close to Serafina, his hand resting on her arm, their faces mere inches apart. A scene of intimacy that twisted Eleanor's stomach into knots. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a drumbeat of disbelief. Eleanor's voice, when it finally came, was a raw whisper that cut through the silence. "Marcus, Sarah, what is going on here?" Marcus recoiled instantly, his hand dropping from Serafina's arm as if burned. Serafina flinched, her vibrant something else Eleanor couldn't quite decipher. Marcus stepped forward, a desperate plea in his, "Eleanor, please, it's not what you think. Let me explain." Eleanor scoffed, a bitter sound. "Not what I think? I see it clear as day. My husband with my son's fiancée on the night of their engagement party." Serafina remained silent, her gaze fixed on the floor, her shoulders trembling slightly. Marcus reached for Eleanor's hand, but she pulled away sharply. "For Jordan's sake, Eleanor," he pleaded, his voice low and urgent. "Don't say anything. Not now." "Let me explain everything later, I promise." The engagement party continued in the main living area, a cacophony of laughter and celebratory music that felt utterly alien to Eleanor. She moved through the guests like a ghost, her mind replaying the scene in Marcus's study. Every time Serafina's laughter drifted her way, or she saw Jordan proudly holding Sarah's hand, Eleanor's heart ached with a pain far deeper than mere jealousy. She watched Serafina closely now, scrutinizing her every move, searching for clues. The way Sarah subtly avoided Marcus's gaze, the nervous habit of touching the small silver locket around her neck, a piece Eleanor had never noticed before. It was a familiar design, though, stirring a faint, unsettling memory from years ago, a memory of Marcus, younger, holding a similar locket, a wistful look in his. The pieces didn't fit, and the picture in her mind was far more complex than a simple affair. Retreating to her private sitting room, a sanctuary of forgotten memories, Eleanor felt a chilling certainty that Marcus's betrayal ran deeper than a fleeting indiscretion. His desperate plea for Jordan's sake, Serafina's terrified silence, the distinctive locket, it all converged into a sickening premonition. She began rummaging through an old, dusty photo album, tucked away in a seldom-opened drawer. Pages flipped past images of holidays, birthdays, and anniversaries, until her fingers brushed against a loose, faded photograph from decades ago. It was a picture of a much younger Marcus, holding a baby, a tiny silver locket dangling from his fingers. The child's face was blurry, but the locket was unmistakable. Her blood ran cold as she noticed the date scribbled on the back, a date long before she and Marcus had met, yet eerily close to a painful chapter Marcus rarely spoke of. A chapter about a lost love, a secret past. As the pieces clicked into place, a horrifying truth dawned on her, a truth that ripped through her heart with a brutal force, shattering her world forever. Serafina wasn't just Jordan's fiancée. She was Marcus's. Eleanor's world had irrevocably shifted. The faded photograph, clutched tightly in her trembling hand, was a cold, hard piece of evidence that Marcus had been hiding a monumental secret. She found him in the dimly lit living room, nursing a drink, the lingering sounds of the party now a distant hum. Her voice, when she spoke his name, was devoid of its usual warmth, sharp with a betrayal so profound it choked her. Marcus visibly flinched, his back straightening as he turned to face her, She didn't hesitate, thrusting the old photograph towards him. The image of his younger self and the baby and accusation hanging heavy in the air between them. "Who is this, Marcus?" she demanded, her voice a low, dangerous growl. "And don't you dare lie to me again." The silence that followed was deafening, punctuated only by the frantic beat of Eleanor's own heart, as she braced herself for the truth she now knew. Deep in her bones would shatter their life. Marcus's PH. He slowly rose, his movements stiff and uncertain, the picture a weapon in Eleanor's grip. "Eleanor, please, let's talk about this calmly," he pleaded, his voice a strained whisper, reaching out a hand as if to soothe her, but she recoiled. "Calmly? You want me to be calm, Marcus? After 25 years of marriage, you let me welcome your illegitimate child into our home, into our son's life, as his fiancée? This isn't calm. This is a nightmare." Her voice rose with each word, tears stinging her. Marcus dropped his head, his shoulders slumping in defeat. "I never meant for this to happen," he murmured, his voice thick with remorse. "It was a mistake a long time ago. I tried to protect everyone, especially Jordan." He looked up, "No one knows." The next morning, a strained silence hung over the Vance household. Jordan, oblivious to the emotional earthquake that had rattled his parents, was buoyant, making plans with Serafina over breakfast. Eleanor watched Serafina, every gesture, every smile, now recontextualized through the prism of the previous night's horrifying revelation. Sarah's cheerful demeanor, her easy laughter with Jordan, felt like a cruel mockery. Eleanor found herself searching Serafina's striking. The small silver locket around Serafina's neck seemed to pulse with an unspoken history, drawing Eleanor's gaze again and again. She wondered if Serafina truly was unaware, or if this innocent facade was a carefully constructed defense. How could she possibly tell Jordan? The thought alone was a searing pain in her chest, a betrayal of monumental proportions that would shatter his world completely. Later that day, Eleanor found Serafina alone in the garden, meticulously pruning a rose bush. The sight of her, so calm and focused, ignited a fresh wave of conflicting emotions in Eleanor. She approached, her resolve hardening with each step. "Sarah," Eleanor began, her voice steady despite the tremor in her heart. "We need to talk. About Marcus." Serafina paused, the pruning shears held midair, her back to Eleanor. A subtle stiffness entered her posture before she slowly turned her. "What about him, Mrs. Vance?" Sarah asked, her tone carefully neutral. But Eleanor sensed a veiled tension, a readiness to parry. Eleanor held her gaze, a silent challenge passing between them. "I know about the locket, Sarah, and I know about your past. Your true past." Serafina's face went utterly blank, a mask falling into place, but her hand instinctively went to the locket at her throat, clutching it tightly. The air crackled with unspoken truths, and the delicate beauty of the garden felt suddenly suffocating. The air in the garden grew thick with the unspoken. Serafina's hand, clutching the small silver locket at her throat, trembled almost imperceptibly. Her striking, Eleanor watched her, a knot of dread tightening in her stomach, but her resolve remained unshaken. She needed the truth no matter how painful. "Don't pretend you don't understand, Sarah," Eleanor pressed, her voice a low, steady current. "I've seen the photograph. Marcus and you, when you were a baby, with that very locket." Serafina slowly lowered her hand, her gaze dropping to the rose bush, as if seeking an escape in the thorny petals. A single tear traced a path down her cheek, betraying the carefully constructed composure. "He told you?" Serafina whispered, her voice barely audible, confirming Eleanor's worst fears. The question itself was a confession. Serafina finally turned fully to Eleanor, her ardedness. "It's true," she confessed, her voice cracking. "Marcus, he's my father." The words hung heavy in the air, each syllable a blow to Eleanor's already fractured heart. Serafina explained how her mother, a woman Marcus had known briefly in his youth, had passed away years ago, leaving Serafina an orphan. Marcus, consumed by guilt and a sense of responsibility, had found her through a private investigator when she was a teenager, offering her financial support and a veiled connection as a family friend, never revealing their true bond. He had asked her to keep it a secret, fearing the repercussions on his marriage and Jordan's perception of him. Serafina had agreed, desperate for a connection, for a family, and had grown to care for Jordan genuinely, never intending for their relationship to escalate into an engagement. Her deepest fear was the moment this truth would be exposed, shattering everything. Eleanor stormed into Marcus's study, the garden's tranquility replaced by an inferno of rage and heartbreak. Marcus, startled, looked up from his desk, his face immediately clouding with apprehension at the sight of her. "She told me everything, Marcus," Eleanor declared, her voice trembling with barely suppressed fury. "Serafina is your daughter. Your daughter! And you allowed her to become engaged to our son. How could you? How could you put Jordan in such an impossible, cruel situation?" Marcus pushed back his chair, running a hand through his distinguished salt and pepper. "Eleanor, I swear I never intended for it to go this far," he pleaded, his voice raspy with desperation. "I just wanted to help her, to be a part of her life. When she and Jordan fell in love, I panicked. I didn't know how to stop it without destroying everything." He tried to reach for her, but Eleanor recoiled, the chasm between them wider than ever. The sharp rap on the study door made both Eleanor and Marcus jump, silencing their heated exchange. Jordan's cheerful voice cut through the tense atmosphere. "Mom? Dad? Everything okay in here? I thought I heard some shouting." Eleanor's heart pounded against her ribs, a frantic drum of panic. She glanced at Marcus, her tea a little longer. But Marcus, his face still pale and drawn with guilt, seemed incapable of moving. The door slowly creaked open, revealing Jordan, his kind of palpable tension in the room. He took in his mother's tear-streaked face and his father's haunted expression, a profound unease settling over him. "What's wrong?" he asked, his voice low, his gaze flicking between them, searching for an explanation, for a truth that was about to shatter his world. The engagement ring, still nestled in its velvet box in his pocket, felt suddenly heavy, a symbol of a future built on a foundation of lies. Jordan stood in the study doorway, his gaze sweeping over his parents, a knot of unease tightening in his stomach. The air was thick with a silence that screamed louder than any shout he thought he'd heard, an oppressive weight pressing down on the opulent room. His mother's face was streaked with tears, her usual composure utterly shattered, a sight that immediately tightened his chest with alarm. His father, usually so commanding and self-assured, looked utterly broken, slumped in his chair, avoiding his son's gaze as if physically unable to meet it. A cold dread, sharp and sudden, seeped into Jordan, replacing the earlier celebratory mood of the evening with a chilling premonition. "What's going on?" he repeated, his voice barely a whisper, the joy from the engagement party draining from him with alarming speed. Eleanor took a shaky breath, attempting to compose herself, but the words seemed to catch in her throat, her lips trembling. Marcus remained silent, his shoulders slumped in defeat, a profound guilt radiating from him. Jordan stepped further into the room, sensing a monumental shift, a deep, irreparable crack forming in the very foundation of his family. "Mom, Dad, please tell me. Why are you both so upset? What happened?" He reached out, a hand hovering between them, desperately seeking an anchor in the sudden, terrifying storm that had engulfed their home. The silence stretched, unbearable, confirming his deepest fears. Eleanor looked at Marcus, a silent, agonizing plea in her ask of defeat, utterly unable to articulate the devastating truth. Taking a fortifying, painful breath, Eleanor turned to her son, her own heart breaking for the seismic shockwave she was about to unleash upon his world. "Jordan," she began, her voice cracking with the immense weight of the revelation. "There's something your father and Serafina have been keeping from you, a secret that changes absolutely everything you thought you knew. Jordan's the impending catastrophe." "What? What are you talking about, Mom? What could possibly be so bad?" he asked, his voice rising, a desperate edge to his tone. Eleanor reached for his hand, her grip tight, as if to brace him for the fall. Serafina isn't just your fiancée, Jordan," she whispered, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. She's your half-sister. She's Marcus's daughter." The words hung in the air like a physical blow, reverberating through the silent room, shattering the very fabric of their reality. Jordan staggered back, his face draining of all color, his The world tilted violently on its axis, and the sound of his own gasp was deafening in his ears. Every happy memory, every shared laugh with Serafina, twisted into a grotesque, sickening lie. Jordan found Serafina by the grand piano in the living room, her fingers idly tracing patterns on the polished keys, a melodic hum escaping her lips, seemingly oblivious to the seismic shift that had just occurred. He approached her, his steps heavy, each one an effort, his heart a raw, bleeding wound that throbbed with every beat. "Sarah," he choked out, his voice hoarse with a pain so profound it barely sounded like his own. She looked up, her expression quickly morphing from placid to terrified as she saw the utter devastation etched into his face, the raw agony in his... "Jordan, what's wrong?" she whispered, her hand instinctively flying to her locket, a gesture that now screamed of her deception. He held her gaze, his own filled with a chilling mixture of agony, accusation, and utter disbelief. "How could you?" he demanded, the words tearing from his throat, ragged and broken. "How could you let this happen? All this time, you and my father, you both knew? You're his daughter, Sarah, my half-sister." Serafina flinched as if physically struck, her entire body recoiling, her eeling pure, unadulterated guilt. "Jordan, please, let me explain," she pleaded, her voice a desperate whisper, reaching out a trembling hand to him. But he recoiled sharply, the betrayal too fresh, too profound to bear her touch. "Everything was a lie," he muttered, shaking his head, tears finally blinding his vision. "Everything." Serafina's desperate pleas fell on deaf ears as Jordan, reeling from the catastrophic revelation, backed away from her, the very air around him feeling poisoned with deceit. The engagement ring, still nestled in its small velvet box in his pocket, felt like a lead weight, a cruel, mocking joke on a future that now seemed impossibly twisted and irrevocably tainted. He looked at her, at the woman he had loved with all his heart, who was also his father's daughter, and felt a profound, aching sense of loss, not just for their relationship, but for the innocence he had always believed his family possessed. "Get out, Sarah," he finally managed to say, his voice devoid of all emotion, a cold, hard shell protecting his completely shattered heart. "Just get out of my sight." Serafina stood frozen, her face a mask of utter devastation, the realization of the enormity of what had been lost washing over her in a suffocating wave. Jordan turned abruptly, walking away, not towards his parents, not towards any comfort, but towards the front door, needing to escape the suffocating weight of the truth that had just crushed him. He opened the heavy door, stepping out into the cool, unforgiving night air, leaving behind the immediate wreckage of his life, a single, horrifying thought echoing in his mind. How could he ever trust anyone again, especially those he loved most? The door closed softly behind him, sealing him in the crushing silence of his shattered world. Jordan drove recklessly through the city streets, the cityscape a blur of neon lights and smeared color, mirroring the chaos inside him. The world outside felt distant, irrelevant, as his mind reeled from the brutal truth. Every mile was an attempt to outrun the pain, the betrayal, the sickening realization that his entire relationship with Serafina had been built on a foundation of lies. He gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were of his shattered heart. He thought of Serafina's terrified face, his father's guilt-ridden silence, and his mother's agonizing confession, each memory a fresh stab. How could they have done this to him? To their family? The engagement ring, still in his pocket, felt like a burning coal, a constant agonizing reminder of a future that had just been irrevocably stolen from him. He had nowhere to go, no one to talk to, just the suffocating weight of a truth too monstrous to comprehend. He felt utterly adrift, a lone ship in a storm of deceit, his world irrevocably broken. Eleanor found Marcus in his study, the room still smelling faintly of stale whiskey and unspoken truths. He sat slumped at his desk, head in his hands, a picture of utter defeat. Her own grief for Jordan's pain was a raging inferno, fueling her renewed fury. She slammed the study door shut, the sound echoing ominously. "Look at him, Marcus. Look at what you've done to our son," she accused, her voice trembling with a potent mix of sorrow and outrage. "He's out there somewhere, broken and alone, Because of your colossal selfishness and your web of lies. Marcus slowly lifted his head, "Eleanor, please, I never wanted to hurt anyone," he pleaded, his voice hoarse. "I know that sounds hollow now, but it's the truth." Eleanor scoffed, a bitter, humorless sound. "Hollow doesn't even begin to cover it. What else, Marcus? What other secrets are festering beneath the surface? Because I can't live like this. Not anymore. Not with a man who could so casually destroy our son's life and our family's trust." The chasm between them felt wider and deeper than ever before, filled with years of untold truths and devastating consequences. Serafina sat huddled on the grand piano bench in the living room, the beautiful instrument a silent witness to her despair. The lingering festive decorations mocked her, a cruel reminder of the dreams that had just shattered. Tears streamed down her face, her body racked with silent sobs that shook her slender frame. She clutched the small silver locket around her neck, its cool metal a stark contrast to the burning pain in her chest. She had loved Jordan, truly loved him, and the thought of his broken heart was unbearable. She had tried to keep the secret, to protect him, but her father's insistence, her own yearning for a family, had led her down this impossible path. Now everything was ruined, and she was alone again, perhaps more isolated than ever before. Her past, a shadow she had tried to outrun, had finally caught up to her, destroying not only her future, but also the man she adored. The overwhelming guilt and sorrow threatened to consume her entirely. Back in her private sitting room, Eleanor sifted through old documents, the weight of the evening pressing down on her. Marcus's evasiveness, even in his confession, gnawed at her. There had to be more. Something deeper he was still hiding. Some key to this decades-long deception. She picked up the faded photograph again, staring at the younger Marcus and the baby. A sudden thought struck her. If Serafina's mother had passed away, who had truly raised Serafina in her early years? And why had Marcus waited until Serafina was a teenager to find her? She remembered a brief mention Marcus had made years ago about a distant relative, a cousin he rarely spoke of, who had lived in the same small town where Serafina's mother was from. With a renewed sense of purpose, Eleanor found an old address book, flipping through its brittle pages until she found a name, handwritten in Marcus's elegant script, Aunt Lena, Willow Creek. A name, a town, and a chilling premonition that the tangled web of Marcus's past was far more intricate and far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. She picked up the phone, her heart pounding with a mixture of dread and grim determination, ready to unearth the next layer of truth. The phone rang 3 times before a hesitant, reedy voice answered. Eleanor, clutching the receiver like a lifeline, introduced herself, explaining her connection to Marcus. A palpable tension hummed through the line as she navigated the delicate conversation, her heart thumping against her ribs with each passing second. The woman on the other end, Aunt Lena, sounded guarded, her initial responses brief and evasive. Eleanor pressed gently, her voice firm but laced with an urgent plea for truth, mentioning the locket and the photograph. The silence that followed was agonizing, broken only by a shaky sigh from Aunt Lena, a sound heavy with years of unspoken burdens and simmering secrets. Eleanor knew then that her instincts were right. There was far more to Serafina's past than Marcus had ever revealed, and Aunt Lena held the missing pieces to this intricate, painful puzzle. The air crackled with the weight of impending revelations. Hours later, Jordan found himself on a deserted, rain-slicked basketball court at a local park, the rhythmic drip of water from the backboard echoing the hollow thud in his chest. The engagement ring, still in its small velvet box, felt like a lead weight in his pocket, a cruel mockery of the future he had envisioned just hours ago. He stared at the rusted hoop, the net torn, a mirror to his own shattered dreams. Every memory of Serafina, every shared laugh, every tender touch, now felt tainted, a betrayal so profound it reached into the very core of his being. He had loved her so fiercely, so innocently, and to think it was all built on such a monstrous lie left him gasping for air. The cool night air did little to quell the burning inferno of pain and anger within him, leaving him utterly adrift in a sea of despair and confusion. Back at the Vance home, the air in Marcus's study crackled with a renewed icy tension as Eleanor confronted him. She raised Serafina Marcus, Eleanor stated, her voice dangerously quiet. Her Aunt Lena, not Serafina's mother, not for most of her life. Why did you lie about that? Why did you make it seem like her mother raised her and simply passed away? Marcus flinched, running a hand through his distinguished salt and pepper. Eleanor, it's complicated. Lena was meant to be a temporary arrangement. Things got out of hand. Eleanor scoffed, a bitter sound. Out of hand? Or were you trying to bury another inconvenient truth? There's more, isn't there? Something about Serafina's mother. Something you're still not telling me. His silence was deafening, a confirmation of her growing suspicion that his web of deceit stretched further than she had dared to imagine. Eleanor couldn't bear another moment of Marcus's evasions. His shifting gaze, the stuttering half-truths, only fueled her grim determination. She needed to hear the full story, unvarnished and raw, from Aunt Lena herself. The truth was buried in Willow Creek, and Eleanor knew she had to unearth it. With a resolute sigh, she began to pack a small overnight bag, her movements deliberate and purposeful. She chose a practical dark travel outfit, her mind already racing with the implications of what she might discover. As she zipped the bag, she glanced at her reflection in the mirror, her expression hardened with a resolve she hadn't felt in years. The delicate silver wedding band on her finger felt heavier than ever, a tangible symbol of the vows that had been so profoundly betrayed. She knew this journey could either save what was left of her family or shatter it beyond repair, but she couldn't turn back now. She had to know. Eleanor arrived in Willow Creek as dusk began to settle, casting long shadows across the quiet, tree-lined streets. Aunt Lena's modest house, nestled among overgrown bushes, seemed to hold its own secrets. Eleanor took a deep breath, the cool evening air doing little to calm her racing heart, and knocked firmly on the faded wooden door. After a moment, the door creaked open, revealing an elderly woman with deep set. Aunt Lena regarded Eleanor with a mixture of apprehension and weary resignation. "Mrs. Vance," she said, her voice raspy, yet surprisingly firm. "I expected you." The unspoken weight of decades of deceit hung heavy between them. Eleanor stepped inside, the cramped entryway feeling suddenly suffocating, her gaze fixed on the older woman, knowing that the truth, however painful, was finally within reach. "We need to talk," Eleanor stated, her voice steady. "About Serafina and Marcus." Miles away, in his sparsely furnished city apartment, Jordan stared blankly at his phone. A dozen unsent messages to Serafina flickering on the screen. The engagement ring box, still unopened since that catastrophic night, lay on his coffee table, a cruel monument to his shattered dreams. He picked up an old photograph of himself and Serafina, laughing carefree on a beach, the image now a bitter mockery. How could the woman he loved, the woman he planned a future with, be his own half-sister? The thought twisted his gut, a cold, sickening coil of betrayal and disgust. He yearned to scream, to smash something, but instead, an overwhelming numbness settled over him, heavier than any anger. He knew he needed answers, not just from his father, but from Serafina too. But the thought of facing either of them filled him with an unbearable dread. He felt profoundly alone, adrift in a sea of his family's monstrous lies, unsure if he would ever find solid ground again. Aunt Lena led Eleanor into a dimly lit sitting room, the air thick with the scent of old paper and dust. She recounted a story far darker than Eleanor had anticipated. Serafina's mother, Alara, hadn't merely been a past love. She had been a young woman in desperate circumstances, manipulated by a much older Marcus. Aunt Lena revealed that Alara, after Serafina's birth, had faced immense pressure from Marcus to give up the child, even experiencing threats to ensure her silence and compliance. "He didn't want the scandal," Lena whispered, her voice laced with ancient pain. "He paid Alara off, forced her to sign papers, and then when she eventually succumbed to illness years later, he orchestrated Serafina's discovery as an orphan. He never truly intended to claim her, only to control her and silence any potential threats to his reputation. He even changed her birth certificate to hide his name and her true age." Eleanor listened, aghast, the full extent of Marcus's calculated cruelty washing over her. Eleanor stumbled out of Aunt Lena's house, the night air now feeling like a suffocating blanket. The truth, raw and brutal, echoed in her mind. Marcus hadn't just hidden a child. He had actively conspired to erase her mother, manipulate Serafina's identity, and construct a monstrous facade of benevolence. This wasn't a mistake of the past. It was a cold, calculated act of profound deception that implicated him far beyond simple infidelity. Her world didn't just shatter. It imploded, revealing a terrifying abyss beneath. Eleanor pulled out her phone, her fingers trembling as she dialed Marcus's number, her mind a whirlwind of rage, disbelief, and a terrifying new resolve. She needed to confront him, not just with her broken heart, but with the undeniable evidence of his profound malevolence. As the phone rang, a chilling thought solidified. This wasn't just about her family anymore. It was about exposing a man capable of truly monstrous acts, and she knew she had to protect Jordan from the true darkness of his father. The line connected, and she took a sharp, painful breath, ready to unleash the storm. Eleanor's voice, though low, vibrated with a cold fury that made Marcus flinch. "You didn't just hide a child, Marcus. You erased her mother. You manipulated Serafina's identity. You fabricated a history. You changed her birth certificate, didn't you?" The words were not a question, but a damning accusation. Marcus Vance, in his early 50s, distinguished Salt and Pepper Short as he wrung his hands, slowly rose from his armchair, his face pale and drawn. He stammered, attempting to form an excuse, but the weight of Eleanor Vance's, in her early 50s, elegant, short, dark, curly, and the undeniable truth in her. "This wasn't a mistake, Marcus," Eleanor continued, her voice rising, each word a hammer blow. "This was a calculated, cruel deception that makes every moment of our marriage a lie." The full extent of his monstrous acts was now laid bare, and there was no hiding from it. As Eleanor confronted Marcus, the front door creaked open. Jordan Vance, a man of African, he had returned, drawn by an inexplicable pull, only to walk into a storm even more violent than the one he'd left. He heard his mother's anguished cries, his father's broken whispers, and pieced together the fragments of a truth far more sinister than he could have imagined. "Changed her birth certificate?" Jordan repeated, his voice hollow. Stepping into the doorway, his 50s, distinguished Salt and Pepper Short tea hand, now visibly trembling. Eleanor Vance, a woman of African Elver wedding band on her finger, turned, her face etched with sorrow as she saw her son, his own face a mask of dawning horror. The final, crushing layer of deceit had been exposed, cementing the true monstrosity of Marcus's actions in Jordan's mind. The living room became the stage for their final, devastating confrontation. Serafina Dubois, a woman of African L silver locket around her neck, sat huddled on the edge of a velvet couch, her. "Jordan Vance, a man of African—" "How could you both?" he asked, his gaze sweeping from Serafina to Marcus Vance, a man of African Orty hand, who sat silently, head bowed. Eleanor Vance, a woman of African Elver wedding band on her finger, stood by Jordan, her hand resting on his shoulder, a silent pillar of strength. "I loved you, Sarah," Jordan choked out, "and you let me believe a lie. You let me fall in love with my sister." Serafina finally looked up, her striking. "I never meant to hurt you, Jordan. I was lost." And he offered a family, however twisted. Marcus remained silent, his guilt a suffocating shroud, as his family, shattered by his deceit, confronted the impossible reality. Months later, the Vance home, once a beacon of family unity, stood as a testament to profound change. Eleanor Vance, a woman of African silver wedding band, had filed for separation, seeking to rebuild her life away from Marcus's shadow. Jordan Vance, a man of African work, the pain a dull ache, but the path to healing slowly opening. He had decided to maintain a cautious, evolving relationship with Serafina Dubois, a woman of African Ket, acknowledging her as a sister, a bond forged from tragedy. Marcus Vance, a man of African Ort G, was left alone in the sprawling house, his once charismatic aura replaced by a profound loneliness, his secrets finally costing him everything. The veil of betrayal had been lifted, revealing a fractured family learning to navigate a new, uncertain future, scarred but resolute in their individual journeys toward truth and healing. Thank you for watching The Veil of Betrayal on Drama Unveiled. Like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more gripping stories.